We watch war movies and they are entertainment. It does not change our everyday behaviour and it is a harmless way of spending our leisure time. But to experience war is a completely different matter. Even those who claim to have a good war are often away from their families and friends and sometimes in great danger. Man is a social animal and feels loneliness and the need to create new friends and lovers. One of the odd things about war, as opposed to watching it on a screen, is that for a lot of the time nothing happens. In the movies you see a man being trained, followed quickly by actual action. But in reality all these things take time, and people wait around for literally hours, if not days, for something to happen. It takes days to kit out people, inoculate them, sort out sleeping arrangements, and get them to stand in line. Even if you are experiencing action, you still have to wait for supplies to be delivered before you can do anything. That happens in all theatres of war. If you are in the desert, your first priority is finding water, and in the Arctic it is staying warm. In the jungle, you cannot fight in the rainy season. Weather can shut down all aeroplanes. Convoys consist largely of endless seas. Time to interact with your companions. This creates problems for the military establishment, as it is happy to promote friendships, but is not keen on people becoming lovers. This is certainly the case, where the people in question are of different ranks. The reasons cited are threats to morale and discipline. It wants a couple separated for the common good. Until recently, being gay in the forces could result in dismissal, irrespective of your general behaviour. But our story is a conventional one of heterosexual love. The luxury Household Bay Hotel on Lizard Point was built in 1894. It was requisitioned by the Army at the beginning of World War II and later by the WAF to run a radar tracking station. The Lizard Peninsula contained a top-secret radar station that closed in 1958. As there were beach parties below the luxury hotel, it could easily be described as a cushy number. Military personnel were not expected to survive in drafty Nissen huts or tents. If you were a senior officer in a wartime women's unit, there were many opportunities for mischief. 2 RAF personnel met at one of the parties, and friendship soon developed into a passionate affair. The woman was Joan Lewis, a 27-year-old corporal from Porthcawl, and the man, William Croft, the station commander, was 32 years old and a married man with 2 children from Bath. William Croft was in deep trouble as he was committing adultery and breaking King's regulations on fraternisation between ranks. He talked to Frida Catlin, head of the WAF, and it was agreed that the couple had to be separated with immediate effect. His request that a transfer was refused, and Joan was ordered to a new station in Devon. She was given 2 days' leave before her departure. She spent it with her star-struck lover, William Croft, in their summer house in the hotel gardens. Over to you, James.
Prior to dawn on the date of her departure on the 14th of October 1943, 2 shots rang out. William ran to the duty officer and confessed he had shot Joan. He then telephoned a fellow officer who broke into the summer house with a sergeant and saw Joan Lewis in a pool of blood. William Croft changed his version to the police to that of suicide by the unfortunate Joan, thus accounting for the 2 bullets in her. As he was out of the room when this occurred, he could not have encouraged her to commit suicide. This would have meant he was culpable of murder. Would this work? Everything depended on the expert witness in the matter of firearms. This was the famed pathologist Dr. Frederick Hocking, who, himself, committed suicide at the age of 98 on the death of his wife. A Webley revolver apparently weighs 9 pounds and requires 9 pounds of strength when cocked and 19 pounds uncocked. Nevertheless, he conceded she could have undertaken the first shot using her thumb. It was the second shot that destroyed William Croft's revised version of events. The gun was on the table, and the poor victim would have been in severe agony, as the first shot had penetrated her chest. She could not have shot herself in the temple, as it would require being fired from a distance of 19 inches from the target. Needless to say, the story was not believed by the jury. A letter was produced to the court with the words, "The thought of you being in the company of another male drives me to distraction." There are certainly shades of jealousy here. The administration of justice is a strange animal. On appeal, William Croft's trip to the gallows was reduced to life imprisonment. Now, John, you have some insights into this case, don't you?
The military, like many organisations, requires a certain degree of mobility on behalf of its personnel. An inconvenience in peacetime, but a source of general unease in wartime. 1 minute you are having the time of your life, in a cushy number, and the next you are in the front line. Friendships are disrupted, and love becomes a matter of sending letters home, etc., rather than a physical contact with another human being. Key question: do you accept the new arrangement or find yourself another partner? One of the odd aspects of the case was that Joan Lewis was allowed to stay on base in the summer house of the hotel for 2 days before the transfer, despite the warning by the head of the WAF, Frida Catlin, that the association must end immediately. And a lowly lance corporal in the summer house for 2 days would certainly have raised gossip to new heights. Whether it would have affected morale and discipline is an interesting point. Romeo and Juliet could be classified as a type of suicide pact. Wartime only heightens one's emotions. There is the general anxiety of war, loneliness, and a complete separation from one's normal surroundings. People can and do extraordinary things in this unnatural environment, but most people revert to normality in peacetime. Dr. Hocking, in his book Bodies and Crimes, covered the case and reveals evidence that a suicide pact was the real motive. It was not submitted at the trial. It showed 4 live cartridges in the Webley. The third cartridge was a Smith & Wesson, which was slightly smaller and meant the firing pin did not work. He concluded that it was a botched suicide attempt. A suicide attempt would result in imprisonment for 2 years. In those days, there was no automatic revision for good behaviour. But if the alternative was the hangman, it was worth a try. What would a contemporary juryman make of this case? A married man with 2 children has a soft job down in Cornwall, whilst our boys are pushing up in Italy in desperate fighting. He had the ability to go on leave to his house in Bath and maintain regular contact with the family. Those who are experiencing the fighting are stuck miles from home and would love to see their families again. Sympathy would be in short supply. At the time of the murder, the Home Secretary was Herbert Morrison, who was Deputy Leader of the Labour Party and part of Winston Churchill's coalition government. As in the Gilbert and Sullivan opera, the Home Secretary's lot is never a happy one. Any decision made is always criticised by someone, and the opposition always adopts a holier-than-thou approach, despite being just as guilty when in government. But all politicians claim to hate hypocrisy, yet are not adverse to practising it as and when required. Needless to say, Herbert Morrison received his fair share of abuse when he authorised the release of the UK's fascist leader Oswald Mosley and his wife from Pentonville Prison in 1943. Despite the unpopularity of the position, many have gone on to number 10. While Herbert Morrison was a pacifist in the First World War, he certainly did not oppose the death penalty. He classified the war as a capitalist one, rather than opposing it on moral grounds. It was his privilege as Home Secretary to reprieve the condemned man from execution and sentence him to life imprisonment. The appeals court could only release the man if the judge misdirected the jury or new evidence appeared. As Home Secretary, Herbert Morrison did not have to justify his decision other than to scribble the words, "Justice must take its course," on the file to condemn the man. We can only speculate as to his real motives. William Croft was certainly sane when killing Joan Lewis, and was certainly not an accident. Also, why was William Croft released after a few years despite a life sentence? Morrison could never be described as a bleeding heart liberal. He was opposed to white women going out with African American soldiers, as this could result, as he put it, in half-caste children. A possible explanation is the effects of the war. Government was desperate to maintain the morale of the armed forces, and in particular the RAF, which was the only military service capable and actually bringing the war on Germany through night bombing. A hanging of a RAF officer in a botched suicide attempt may have a negative effect on morale. Did the RAF intervene and persuade the Home Secretary to commute the death sentence to life imprisonment, and later the release of the condemned man within a few years? It is of interest that Dr. Hocking later committed suicide like his most famous counterpart, Dr. Bernard Salisbury. Farmers and vets are known to use suicide as a means of leaving this life, but are pathologists in the same category. Dissecting the dead can have an effect on one's personality. This tragic tale would have remained in obscurity but for events that occurred after the RAF stopped scribbling on the hotel walls and it returned to private use. People kept claiming to see the ghost of Joan Lewis. In 1978, Mr. and Mrs. Stanley, friends of Dr. Hocking, bought the hotel and were sceptical about these sightings. Two events occurred that shook their attitude. A meeting was arranged for the following evening. The next night, Mr. Stanley led the lady to the same bench by torchlight and left her there. On her return, she gave a complete description and dates of the doomed lovers. The woman in question was a clairvoyant, so you can draw your own conclusion. In another incident, a commercial artist from Sheffield told Mr. Stanley about witnessing a sad-looking woman in the garden. He was not told of Joan Lewis. Later, he witnessed the same woman and was asked to draw it. It was a woman in a military uniform. After these two stories, there have been no further news on the ghost. Perhaps it has gone away. Time will tell. Ghost stories fascinate the public, especially in wintertime. You must make your own minds up on these stories.